All right, ready for a deep dive into the world of poetry? Well, maybe not the kind you'd expect.
Oh, do tell.
We're diving into the work of Adriana Rosales today.
Ah, interesting choice. And what makes this deep dive special?
We've got something unique, a YouTube video of Adriana herself talking about her work, what makes her tick, you know?
Wow, that's a real treat. Like getting a peek right into the creative process straight from the source,
Ah,
especially with poets, that's gold.
exactly. And even before we get to the actual poems, Adriana's take on poetry itself, well, it grabbed my attention. She's not exactly a fan of rules, let's just say that.
No rules. How so?
She straight up asks, and I quote, "Who makes up these stupid rules?"
Huh. Bold statement. I bet that resonates with a lot of people who, maybe felt a bit stifled by the traditional poetry they had to study in school.
Totally. But here's the thing, even though she's like, to heck with the rule book, her poetry isn't just random words on a page.
Right, definitely. It's crafted, but in a way that feels very different from, say, classic poetry.
Yeah, there's a real distinct style there.
And I think part of what shapes that style is her creative process. Adriana mentions that she rarely reads other poets while she's writing.
Really. Interesting. So what does she focus on instead?
She calls it her internal landscape.
Okay, that sounds pretty deep. What does she mean by that exactly?
It's like her main inspiration isn't coming from outside stuff, like other poets or what's happening in the news. It's more about her own emotions, memories, the way she experiences the world, her own world.
So it's all coming from within,
Yeah.
and that's what shapes her poetry.
Exactly. She's drawing from this well of personal experience. And she actually has this system, a daily practice of writing a poem or two, driven by whatever emotional state she's in and this amazing love for life that really comes through in her work.
I love that. It's like she's taking those everyday emotions, the highs and lows, and turning them into art.
Exactly. And that daily commitment, that's something we can all learn from, even if we're not, poets ourselves. It's about making that space for self-exploration, being creative no matter what our outlet is.
Absolutely. Now, there's something that really intrigued me. Adriana's fascinated by people who live, as she puts it, square lives. What is it about that stands out to her, do you think?
It's fascinating, right? Remember her whole no rules thing. Well, maybe she sees those who live by the rules, the norms, those square lives, as the embodiment of that. And it's the contrast, the tension between that and her own embrace of, well, freedom that sparks her creativity.
So it's like she needs that opposite, that opposing force to define her own artistic identity.
Maybe. It's a bit like how a sculptor needs the resistance of the stone to shape what they create.
That's a great way to put it. So beyond this idea of contrasting lifestyles, Adriana also talks about a deeper purpose for her poetry.
Yeah.
Healing. It's not just about pretty words on a page, it's about channeling emotions, making sense of the world.
Right. And she even makes a comparison to dancing, which is her friend's art form. Different mediums, but both are ways to express and process those emotions. And in the end, they both lead to that sense of healing, of wholeness.
That makes a lot of sense. And this brings us to one of her most popular poems, Come Find Me, which has this amazing backstory and tells us a lot about how she creates.
What I found really striking about this poem is where it came from. She wrote it at her kitchen table, morning light streaming in, having breakfast with her kids. It's so rooted in the everyday, yet it explores these really profound themes.
It really challenges that whole stereotype of the poet, isolated in a tower, lost in their own world. Adriana finds poetry right in the thick of life.
Absolutely. And you can see that reflected right in the opening lines. She starts with these sensory details. Yellowish golden light, shimmering glass.
It's like she's bringing us right into that moment with her. I could practically see the sunlight.
And then she moves from the visual to sound, evoking the sounds around her. Hymns of buzzing bees, silence of rocks. That contrast, the buzzing and the stillness, it creates this amazing texture in the poem.
It's like a sonic landscape, blending the natural world with her inner world.
And then there's this unexpected detail. She weaves in those little things from her son's playtime. Pencil sharpeners, coloring books.
That's so relatable. It's like a snapshot of family life tucked into this poem about deeper things.
It shows her skill,
Yeah.
blending the everyday with the profound. Her poetry becomes both personal and universal.
It really goes. As the poem goes on, though, it's not just about sensory details anymore. There's this phrase, come find me. It pops up throughout, and it feels so layered.
It's like a mantra, almost.
Right.
And it could mean so many things. Is it about romantic longing, a spiritual search? Or maybe it's about connecting with a deeper part of herself,
That's interesting because the poem starts with those very grounded images, the kitchen table, the kids' toys, but then it expands outward, like she's looking beyond her immediate surroundings to something bigger.
Exactly, and that movement outward becomes even more clear as it progresses. The poem culminates in this incredible cosmic imagery.
Oh, yeah. We're talking stars colliding, black holes, even a glimpse of God's face. Such a powerful ending. It really makes you think.
It does make you wonder, what does that cosmic imagery tell us about Adriana's view of the world? What does it mean to find her in this vast, almost unimaginable space?
That's a great question, and one we'll definitely explore further as we keep diving into Adriana Rosales and her unique way of approaching poetry.
It really is a shift, isn't it? And in the video, Adriana actually mentions that she wrote that cosmic part, late at night looking up at the stars.
Wow. Almost like she was pulling inspiration from a completely different place.
Yeah, exactly.
It makes me think about her whole thing about rejecting those rules of poetry. Maybe this cosmic imagery, is it another way she's like breaking free from what people expect?
That's a really good point, actually. It's not just about, rejecting the traditional forms or rhyme schemes. It's about pushing the boundaries of what we even consider, appropriate subjects for poetry.
Totally. And yet, even though she's like breaking all these rules, her poetry still feels so carefully crafted. The way she uses imagery, the language, it all comes together to evoke these powerful emotions.
Oh, absolutely. Rejecting the rules doesn't mean you just throw craft out the window. Adriana clearly understands poetic techniques. She's just using them in a way that serves her own vision, like take a look at how she uses enjambment in Come Find Me. Running those lines of poetry over, no punctuation, it creates this feeling of breathlessness, of longing.
Oh, yeah, I see that. It's like we're pulled along as readers,
Yeah.
almost searching right alongside her.
Exactly. And that sense of searching, that longing to connect with something, it's so central to her work.
Definitely.
In the video, she mentions how drawn she is to those raw, unfiltered experiences of life, and she wants her poetry to reflect that rawness.
It's like she's saying, hey, this is me, the good, the bad, the messy, and I'm not afraid to put it all out there.
Yeah. And that's what makes her poetry so powerful. There's a vulnerability there, an honesty that just resonates with readers.
We've talked a lot about Adriana's approach, how she rejects those rules, her interest in those contrasting lifestyles, that powerful imagery she uses. But I'm curious, what would you say is at the heart of her poetry? What truly defines her as a poet?
That's a great question. It's hard to pick just one thing, but if I had to, I'd say it's her commitment to authenticity.
Authenticity.
Yeah. Every single line of her poetry feels like it's coming straight from her heart, from her soul. No pretense, no trying to be something she's not, just pure, raw emotion.
I love that. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier, that internal landscape she draws from.
Yeah.
It's like she's not trying to be anyone but herself. And that's what makes it so powerful, so relatable.
Exactly. And I think there's a lesson there for all of us, whether we're poets or not. There's a real freedom in embracing who we are, the good and the bad, and letting that shine through in whatever we do.
And maybe that's the takeaway from this whole deep dive into Adriana Rosales, right?
Yeah.
To be a bit more like her, to be more ourselves.
Yeah.
To find those little bits of poetry in our everyday lives and have the guts to share them with the world. Rules or expectations be damned.
Beautifully said. And who knows, maybe if we do that, if we embrace those unique voices, we'll create something just as moving and inspiring as Adriana Rosales.
I love that.
Oh,
So
yeah.
to our listeners out there, if you're as captivated by Adriana Rosales and her work as we are, we have something special for you. We've got a QR code that'll take you straight to a playlist of her poems. But here's the twist. They're set to music.
A whole new way to experience her work.
It's really cool. As you're listening, pay attention to how she uses language to create those sensory experiences, those vivid images and sounds we've been discussing.
It's a masterclass in poetic craft, really.
And remember, you don't have to be a poet to appreciate poetry. Just come with an open mind, let the words wash over you, and see where they take you.
And if you find yourself feeling inspired, if you want to tap into your own creative side, don't hold back. Adriana's story reminds us that everyone has a story to tell.
Absolutely. And sometimes poetry is a perfect way to tell it. It really is amazing, isn't it? How Adriana shows us that poetry can be anywhere, even in those little moments we usually just, pass right over.
Yeah, totally. Remember that image from the poem? Her at the kitchen table, all those like pencil sharpeners, coloring books,
Yeah.
those everyday things, they take on this whole new meaning in the context of the poem.
It really makes you wonder, what are those seemingly unimportant moments in our own lives,
Hmm.
you know, the ones that actually have all this poetic potential hidden inside.
That's what's so cool about what Adriana's doing. She's encouraging us to see the world differently, to find the extraordinary in the ordinary.
Yeah. And to remember that we don't need to wait for some big, huge inspiration to hit us over the head. We can find poetry in, like, the way the sunlight falls on our kitchen window or in the sound of people laughing.
Exactly. It's about being present, paying attention to those tiny details, letting them fuel our creativity.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Adriana Rosales and her work, I want to leave you with a little challenge.
Ooh, a challenge. I like it. What is it?
Think about what your Come Find Me poem would be like.
Yeah.
Where would you want us to find you? What details, what experiences, what longings would you share with the world?
That's a really powerful prompt. It gets right to the heart of what Adriana's poetry is all about, I think. It's an invitation, to connect, to share our stories, and to find beauty in the unexpected.
Beautifully said.
Hmm.
And who knows, maybe if we all embrace our own voices, we'll create something just as moving and inspiring as Adriana Rosales. Until next time, happy deep diving.